Okay, everyone, we'll get started. Again, this is M.R. Rangaswamy, the founder of Indiaspora here in San Francisco, and I have two eminent people with me today. Again, just a brief on Indiaspora. We are a network, we are a platform for the global diaspora to be a force for good. So we do a lot of programming around many different topics. Recently, we had an AI summit. We also hosted a chief minister from India. We had a women's health session, a parenting session. So really look for programming from Indiaspora on a variety of topics that are important to our diaspora. Recently, we also released the Indiaspora Impact Report on how Indian Americans are positively impacting US society. You can get all this at indiaspora.org. Also, if you don't subscribe to our newsletter, please do so on our website. At this time, I just want to introduce Arun Kumar. Arun Kumar is a venture capitalist with Celesta Capital. Prior to this, he was the CEO of KPMG India. And before that, he was in the Obama administration as well. And he happens to be on the board of Indiaspora and a longtime friend. So I want to welcome Arun. And with him is Raj Shah. Raj is an Indiaspora member and a venture capitalist, but in a prior life, he was also a fighter pilot. So we have two very interesting people. And Raj is the author of a new bestseller called Unit X. And in brief, Unit X is a book that kind of navigates you through the maze of working with governments, working with defense departments, defense companies, and so forth, in terms of how startups in particular can work with these institutions to supply solutions and much needed innovation to the military as well. So without further ado, I want to turn the floor over to Arun, and who will introduce Raj, but also there'll be a whole time set aside for questions. So there's a Q&A box. Feel free to put your questions in. And without further ado, Arun, over to you.
Yeah, no. Thanks, Amar. Great to be here. And it's a great pleasure for me to host Raj Shah today. I have admired Raj since I first got to meet him some 15 years ago. He has, as Amar said, an amazing biography, F-16 fighter pilot, McKinsey consultant, in public service, co-founding and leading the Defense Innovation Unit, which you'll hear about today. Successful tech entrepreneur and founder of a pioneering venture capital firm. And alongside, Raj is involved in public policy initiatives and conversations with his affiliation with the Hoover Institution, with working with Eric Schmidt on national security and technology topics, and also teaching a course at Stanford. And now he's an author of a fascinating book, Unit X. The book is an easy and absorbing read, and I highly recommend it. The book is subtitled, How the Pentagon and Silicon Valley Are Transforming the Future of War. The book is co-authored by Raj and Christopher Kershoff. Chris has a similarly distinguished record, combining academic achievement and then public service, with a ringside seat at the highest circles of power in the White House and the Pentagon. I would occasionally see Chris in the corridors of the executive office or the West Wing or at a White House party when we both served in the Obama administration. Chris was then leading an effort to integrate technology innovation into government operations in the context of national security. So Raj and Chris founded the Defense Innovation Unit, fostered by a visionary Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, sadly no more, as he had an untimely demise 2 years ago. Raj, in fact, reported directly to Secretary Carter. As it turns out, Secretary Carter was my neighbor in DC. His apartment was directly across from mine. Now, I don't know if I shared with him that Raj would occasionally stay at my place when he traveled all the way to DC to meet the secretary. But I distinctly recall a conversation when he told me he had huge expectations of Raj. The book is the story of how those expectations were met and surpassed. The cover of the book, I don't know if you can see it, not focusing. The cover of the book is what shows a fighter jet sitting astride a mobile phone. and captures the essence of the combination the book talks about, the coming together of commercial technology and defense. So Unit X is the story of Defense Innovation Unit X. It was called DIUX, X for experimental, which was a specialized team in the Department of Defense designed to bridge the gap between military needs and Silicon Valley's cutting-edge technology. The book outlines how this unit was tasked with rapidly integrating advanced technology into the US military. Now, that is not easy, as the bureaucracy in the Pentagon and Congress can not only be slow, but can be an opposing force. So, what happens when Silicon Valley innovation and agility take on the rigidities and the hierarchical culture of the defense establishment? The book tells us about that. Furthermore, the book gives us an overview of the high stakes involved in transforming military operations through innovation. The book is also more than the story of the DIUX. It is about the urgency of maintaining technological superiority in a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape. So geopolitically, we have rising competition from China. There are threats from Russia. Just look at Ukraine. We have threats from Iran, whose drones are being deployed in many conflicted regions, and a rogue power in North Korea with nuclear capability. And then there is a rapid evolution of technology. Technology is transforming the nature of warfare. Just have to look at the various issues of foreign affairs over the last 2 years, and you see plenty of articles on this topic. Drones are displacing fighter planes. The drones are controlled by people sitting far away. So how does one neutralize these remote combatants when they are your adversaries? And artificial intelligence is advancing at a pace faster than most had predicted. The book talks about the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, with which Raj and his colleagues have been involved. So these are all areas from drones to AI, where venture capital also can play a role. So Raj's fund, Shield Capital, invests in companies with defense relevance. And my fund, Celesta Capital, has also seen the potential of such investments. And we've had some very successful plays in the US and actually even in India. So now let me start the conversation with Raj with the context about him, about his co-author, about the book, and the issues it addresses. So Raj, let me start from a very different angle. Start with your narratives of a couple of people who were consequential to your enterprise, DIUX. And maybe we start with Secretary Carter, to whom you've dedicated the book. So what was his vision? What kind of a person was he?
Yeah. Well, first off, Arun, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to MR and the whole Indiaspora team. Secretary Carter was a once-in-a-generation reformer. He combined some really unique skills. One, he was a visionary, and I'll explain, his vision and how it came to fruition. But more importantly, he combined that vision with operational understanding of just how to get things done as an executive. And then finally, I think the third thing that he did remarkably well is that he inspired all those around him, inspired him to serve and to want to solve these problems. So in 2001, Ash Carter was a professor at Harvard, and he wrote a seminal paper with an individual named Marcus Luttrell and Marcel. And in that paper, he basically talks about how the future of conflict and deterrence was going to be driven by the commercial sector, about things that were being built in places like Silicon Valley and Boston. So now you fast forward to 2015, right? Nearly 15 years later, he's now in the Pentagon as the Secretary of Defense, and he has this vision of, I'm going to go and implement this. And he sets up a unit called Defense Innovation Unit Experimental to go after this. And, I think what made Secretary Carter so different is, and I sat in these meetings, right? He'd have some vision. He wants to move fast, break a lot of glass. The Pentagon's a 3 million person organization, the largest in the world. And you would have the staff, or you'd have team mates come up and say, sir, that's a really great idea, but we just can't do it because of this reason, that reason, this reason, right? And because he had known the building so well, he'd just say, BS, I know you can do it. And if you don't do it, I'm going to find someone else that will. And so he would just, push the bureaucracy and push the organization through it. And finally, like on the human side, he empowered us, me and Chris and our two other colleagues, we're all in our late 30s, which is pretty young for a Pentagon job or leadership job. And he would just support us as we were, ruffling feathers. I had a weekly call with his chief of staff, this guy named Eric Rosenbach, and we just give him the list of all the blockers that we had. And he'd dutifully take notes. And the next week there'd be memos that go out from Secretary Carter to the building, and those blockers would go away. And and he had such personal warmth. Whenever you would meet him, and actually the best way, interesting, to have a meeting with Secretary Carter would be to just wander the halls of the E-ring, the outer ring of the Pentagon on the top floor, because he had a bad back, and so he would just walk in between meetings. So if you went out in the hallway, you'd run into him, he'd give you a big bear hug, and then you'd have your 2-minute conversation and get whatever you needed to get solved rather than going through the staff. But that's the kind of leader he was, and the inspiration that he brought forth, and that still continues to this day.
What a great story. And what about Senator McCain? You talk about him in the book.
I do. The first branch of the government is the legislative branch, right? And they own the power of the purse. And as much as the Pentagon wants to do something, if you can't write the checks for it, it's not going to get done. So having a close relationship there was really important. And so, Senator McCain, who I got to meet a couple times, but certainly wasn't close to like Carter, was also a maverick and a reformer, right? The Navy fighter pilot. His father and grandfather were both 4-star admirals, and he would not suffer fools in the building. And so if he thought that the brass were not executing and discharging their duties, he'd let them have it, and he was unafraid to cut resources. And maybe we can tell the story later of one of the meetings or the projects we had that led up to my meeting with him. But I sat with him in a meeting in his office about a particular project that we were working on in the Middle East, and he was very pleasant and took on board, asked tough questions. But then the next week there was the Secretary of the Air Force and a bunch of generals asking for extra money, and he was unhappy with the project, and so he forced them to cancel the project and take a different path. So he was quite unafraid of anybody.
So I like this part of the book where you meet him and he said, well, so-and-so says you're a fighter pilot, McCain said. You say, yes, sir. Navy? You say, no, Air Force. McCain says, Air Force? Well, don't be too embarrassed. You guys aren't the softest people say.
Yeah, he had a wisecracking sense of humor. There's always a natural friendly rivalry between the Navy and the Air Force, and he didn't hold back.
So let's move on to technology. So can you tell us about some of the disruptive technologies that Unit X enabled?
So you have to kind of think back historically. The group was founded in 2015, and this was a time of the world of history when the Snowden revelations had just been disclosed. And so there were many in Silicon Valley that looked at the government, the US government, as just as much a danger as maybe our foreign adversaries, right? They're spying on our technology, taking it away. It's also a time when it was so hard to do work with the government that most of the leading venture capitalists would advise their companies not to work with the government, the early stage companies, right? Because if it takes, if you have to prove your traction every 18 months for your next round of financing, and a government contract takes 4 years, it just didn't work. And so there was this really strong divide, both culturally and business-wise. And even though we were seeing, amazing technologies from mobile to cloud, modern SaaS software, all of that had sort of bypassed the military, right? If you went back into a military command center in the mid, 2010s, it was an education on what was the finest technologies from the 1980s, right? Like, you had troops that were in their barracks, on their phones, playing games, communicating, and then they go back into an operations center where Excel and MercChat, for those that remember that, were the ways that you actually got the business of war done. And so I think what this unit did was help unlock and understand that these technologies that had led to the commercial technology revolution were applicable, right? So we're in the early days of machine learning and AI. It was the early days of autonomous vehicles, both self-driving cars, but also drones, right? Like, if you think about one project that we were working on was to help our special operations forces, who at the time were going from house to house in Afghanistan and Iraq to try to find terrorists. And so, you have some intelligence that says there's some, bomb maker in this house. You want to go in and capture them and try to get more information. Well, what they found was that the first special operator that went through the door had a high likelihood of getting shot, right? Going into a bad guy's house. And so, the Pentagon first idea was like, we'll build an Iron Man suit. Wow, that sounds great, but that violates multiple laws of physics to have a big Iron Man suit and the power to drive that. So we had met this team from MIT, a bunch of young kids, one of whose brother had served in the Navy SEALs, and said, why don't we use little drones? The drone will go in, it'll use this technology called SLAM, which is autonomous mapping, figure out what's in there and send the data back to the operator so they'll know what's inside and have some intelligence. And so it's this sort of orthogonal approach to solving problems using technology that wouldn't surprise anybody in the Valley that led to the early successes of DIU.
You had another story of going to Qatar, to the Air Force Command in Qatar, and seeing how they were trying to manually figure out where all the various planes and refueling planes were. Do you want to share that story? Because
Sure. So this would have been the fall of 2016. I got to travel to Qatar to something called the Combined Air Operations Center, called the CAOC. And it is the command center where all the air operations over Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria were being led by. And so it's this cavernous warehouse with screens on every wall and projectors of Predator drone feeds and maps and this and that. So it looks kind of modern. But again, as I was saying, if you get down to the actual way the operations will work, it was PowerPoint and Excel and people, chatting with each other using just text chat. There's no recording of any of this. It didn't really look that much different than when I was in uniform there, literally a decade earlier. But one of the things we saw on this tour, and Eric Schmidt was on this tour with us, was how they did the tanker planning. So every day there, you have to plan where the air refueling tankers, right? So a big 707 Boeing jet full of gas, where is it going to be, and what refuelers or what fighter jets are going to come and get gas. And that plan, which has to be made every 24 hours and sent to all the units around the area, took 60 man-hours to build. And it was built on a whiteboard with magnetic pucks, dry erase markers, and one guy on an Excel sheet doing math, the other one typing it into the system, and took 60 hours, right? And we looked at that and we said, this is just an optimization problem, traveling salesman. This is like an easy application. So I called a colonel on my team, this guy named Colonel Enrique Odi. I said, I've got the right idea for you to go and tackle. Start working on building this and find me some engineers. So found 3 engineers from the Air Force, 3 long-haired folks from the Valley that probably couldn't pass a drug test. But we got them on a plane. We sent them to Qatar through the Secretary's office. We got them 24-hour clearances. In fact, we got the clearance for the first individual to bring a Macintosh into the CAOC because there's always a Windows machine, and the security guy's like, how do we have a Mac? Well, no good coder is going to code on your Windows XP machine. So anyways, they did, product-centered design. They sat with the users, and basically in like 2 months, built this program that was digital and would basically build the plan in a couple minutes, and then the teams would spend an hour quality controlling them. It's just one small piece of the puzzle. But what we discovered was what was happening there on a daily basis is there would be something called a troops in contact. This is when bad guys began to shoot at Marines or Army folks. And the first thing you do when they call for help is you send fighters to scream over there to help them, right? Which was the job I was doing when I was deployed. Well, fighters are pretty thirsty, and so then you have to send tankers. Well, because the plan would take 60 hours to do, you couldn't just change it. So what they had was these tanker jets sitting on alert at different bases in the region, and they would scramble them. So, like you see on TV, guys run into the airplane, fire it up and go. And because now with this new tool, you could reform or change the plan real time because of its capability, they were saving 3 to 4 scrambles a day. Each scramble of a tanker cost about $250,000, not including the wear and tear on the airplanes. And so this whole tool paid for itself in about a week. And that would have been a great story. We solved this one little problem. But I think what's really important, and that was the point of this whole group, was how do you change the culture of the program? And when we first built it, the Air Force Program Office, right, the group that was in charge of building the software for the KAOC, said, hey, this is really great, guys. Thanks for building this. Wonderful. We have a 10-year program to do it. It's holistic. We'll take your tech under advisement. And, we're going to turn it off because it's not supported. You didn't go through our process. And the commander there, 3-star, said, hey, that's great, but I'm using this in combat operations right now. And so until you come up with your new plan, program office, I'm not going to turn it off. And it was all around that same time that one of McCain's staffers was visiting, saw it, and then McCain learned that the Air Force, this group wanted an extra $75 million because their 10-year program was delayed. And so really what that led to was McCain, after our meeting, canceling that program and telling the program office to use the methodologies that we had pioneered. And it led to the first software factory in the Air Force. It's called Kessel Run. It's based in Boston. And it led to a whole new way of doing the KAOC. And they've slowly gone through all the 40 apps there. So, again, this one guy, Enrique, with his ability to deliver, one general saying that we're going to keep doing it, and one senator says we're going to not do it, turned off $1 billion program and reformed it. So, individuals matter, and little efforts can go a long way.
Yeah, and your book has some other stories of similar individuals who mattered. Staying on the topic of technologies, what can you share about technologies being used in Ukraine? You visited out there, you saw it for yourself, you helped make things happen.
So I had the opportunity to go visit last October. I went to Ukraine and I visited a bunch of drone factories, and I visited one of the testing facilities where they were testing these drones against Russian electronic warfare systems. And those guys would take their little drones, they'd fly it in the morning, the jammers were doing their thing, and they'd learn lessons, and that afternoon the coders would be coding, and then they'd fly it again later in the afternoon. And so I think the biggest takeaway is how fast things are changing. We in the military usually used to things from a big hardware standpoint changing, we measure that change in the course of years, maybe months, certainly not days and hours. And so the speed of this is something we have to take note of. I think the second thing, which happened just a couple of months ago, is we sent Ukrainians Abrams tanks, M1A1 Abrams. It's the best main battle tank in the world. We sent, I think, 30 of them. And I think 25% of those were disabled by Russian kamikaze drones. So you've got a, $5,000 drone disabling an $8 million tank, and they had to withdraw them from the front lines. And so I think what we're seeing here is the early glimpses of a revolution in military affairs, where some of our broad tenets on what works and what doesn't work is shifting. And we have to take advantage of that, understanding that shift and learning those lessons. And again, it's not to say that iPhones or drones are going to replace tanks and airplanes, but how they interact and how we speed up advancements, particularly in software, is something we should heed.
Yes, to all those listening, the book is full of really exciting stories of these applications. When you read it, you actually feel you've gone to the battlefield and you're sitting with a pilot who's trying to attract, I guess, in the case of Ukraine, attract Russian fire, but quickly trying to neutralize them. And you had a technology that addressed that particular issue.
In terms of some of the drone work, the returning fire, yes. So we did a couple of projects that now the Pentagon has declassified. Again, you step back to 2018. DJI is the largest drone manufacturer in the world, and folks or terrorists in Afghanistan and Syria were using these commercial drones. They'd attach a grenade to it and try to drop it on troops.
Chinese manufacturer.
What's that?
The Chinese company?
It's a Chinese company, yeah, DJI, right? So, but everyone buys them. They're the most popular drone, but you had insurgents, right, in Syria using these. And so our troops, they had great missile systems. If you try to fly a Russian MiG over our troops, we have a great answer, and that will never happen. We didn't have an answer to these drones, and folks were trying to shoot it and jam it, but they would capture a few of them. And traditionally, when you think about capturing of enemy war material, we have great facilities here stateside to go and deconstruct those and reverse engineer them, pull data out, but that doesn't help someone in the field at the speed that we need, right? Again, it's designed for Russians defecting with their MiG. And so we helped develop a technology. There was a couple of individuals on the team that built a software app that could fit on a military issued Android. You could plug it into the drone, download the data, analyze it, and quickly understand where did the drone come from. And that's where the bad guys probably were, or where is it being controlled from. And so these are the type of small battlefield enhancements that made a difference. But again, making that meta point, Mark Andrews says software is eating the world. Well, we say software is eating war as well. And we need to also have that same kind of mindset to take advantage.
Raj, I found it really strange that the US Armed Forces were using a Chinese drone so extensively. But of course, you did various things to make sure that it isn't transmitting information back to China.
Yeah, it goes back to our view on globalization and focusing on developing high-end IP, right? Think about the chips world, and all the designs are here, but the fabrication is done in Taiwan, China, or South Korea. As we think now about supply chains and maybe a more hostile world where these revanchist, revisionist authoritarians, we don't have the ability to build drones, even if we wanted to. And it's not even just the cost standpoint. If you think about all the microcontrollers and motors and things, that huge supply chain to build a DJI drone that for $500 can, follow your kid playing baseball, it'd be very hard for us to replicate that. So this supply chain security is an industrial policy is a real issue. And I know you spent some time on that, and the White House has had the chips and other things, but I think it's a really, really important topic that's not going away.
Let's come to some organizational matters. How did you bridge the kind of disciplined military culture and the ways of the establishment, the ways of that establishment, and the freewheeling Silicon Valley culture?
Yeah, that was very interesting, exciting ways of approaching. We did some things extremely differently than you would in a traditional military organization. First and foremost, I told the Secretary's team I'd only take the job if they allowed us to use G Suite as our backbone IT, because we needed to collaborate and move quickly, and the old IT just wasn't going to work. So we were the first group to get our .mils hosted on Google. Lots of other little things, culturally. though half my team was military officers, and listen, they didn't wear uniforms in the office or only did it once a month. We had some rank inversion, right, where normally someone of lower rank would never report to a higher rank. Well, we had this drone expert, and I had him run the drone team, and I had a lieutenant colonel from a different group, and I said, you're going to work for him and under his group in leadership. And so we wanted people that were like-minded. On the other hand, too, though, the discipline, the seriousness of the matters that the military culture brought, I think was well respected. And you got to think this was all done pre-Ukraine war a long time ago, but I think the Silicon Valley engineers, really wanted to work on something that mattered, right? It's life and death. It's preserving democracy over autocracy. And, hearing the experiences of the military men and women on the team, and most of them had probably spent time in combat, just given what's happened in the last 2 decades, I think added a level of gravity to what engineers work that they really appreciated. So it was a great combination of the two. And, ultimately I look at all of these things and they're human endeavors, right? Like it's just, they're not nameless, faceless organizations. There's people in them, and they have to have trust for them to be effective.
So let's, the book is about disruption and about transforming the ways technology is taken from commercial innovation into defense and security. A large part of that was to be able to make young companies with advanced technologies rapidly successful. So how did you go about re-engineering the procurement processes in particular to make that happen?
Yeah, this is another example of one of these heroes. So in our first week of taking on this job, Chris and I knew we had to put points on the board. So we start, we're meeting everybody on the team, and we meet this young woman named Lauren Daly. Lauren's father was a tank commander, and her way of serving now was on the civilian corps of the Army, particularly in acquisitions. And she said, hey, Roger, Chris, I was reading the 2017 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act. It's a multi-thousand page annual bill on what the Defense Department does, right? No one reads this. And she's like, in section 806, I don't remember the exact number, I found this clause that says we can find a way to do acquisitions a lot faster, and we have this new authority to kind of bypass the standard process. I was like, well, that sounds really interesting. Can you write us a report on it and what it looked like? Well, she says, yeah, here it is. I already done it, and gave us this 20-page paper on how to implement it. And so later that week, Chris and her get on a plane. They go to the Pentagon. They meet the Pentagon's head acquisition lawyer, and then they meet the general counsel of the Pentagon. And by the next week, Secretary Carter's office has approved this new process. And it's called an OTA, Other Transaction Authority. It was a special subset of that she named, called a CSO. And that's how we began to put companies on contract. And we could go from meeting a company to getting a contract in under 90 days. And now fast forward 10 years later, the Pentagon has put $70 billion worth of procurement through this vehicle that, this young woman in her late 20s developed and championed. So again, individuals matter.
So let's step back into the larger geopolitical scene. So how worried should we be about China?
I'm not necessarily a China expert or watcher, but if you listen to, I think, some of Xi's speeches and talks, and particularly I've read the translations of some of those, in English. He's very clear that reunification is a major goal of his, and he now is, president for life, has full power and authority. And so I wonder if you just have to take him at his word that he really views that as one of his life's goals. Now, often folks will make the argument, it would be, economically crazy for that to happen. It would plunge the world into 7-8% global depression, right? GDP drops 7-8%, probably even worse for China, maybe in the 20s. So it would be, you know, economically terrible. But if you look at his other actions, is what he's done with his tech sector himself and how he's come to attack entrepreneurs that were creating great wealth and rivaling U.S. companies, right? They're all trying to flee. So I don't know. I guess you have to hope for the best and plan for the worst. And really, you know, I think it would war in the straits there would be so bad that we really need to focus on deterrence. We need to convince them that you may not win. Your ships might not make it across the straits. It would be just a really bad idea to try to do that. The Taiwanese will fight because look, for us, even though we're building 2 new fabs here in the U.S., they're all still built there, right? Like we need TSMC and that capability. Not to even mention, you know, the reputational risk I think that comes to the Western liberal order.
And any insights into their application of technology in defense? You know, they're investing a lot in AI. We mentioned drones that even the US is using.
Well, I can just repeat what's been publicly said by the commander of the Indo-PACOM region, Admiral Paparo, and he has publicly stated that he has this effort they call Hellscape, kind of a, I guess, catchy word, but it's the idea that they would be able to deter and prevent ships from the mainland going to Taiwan. And he's talked publicly of having a mix of drones in the air, drones on the sea, drones under the sea. And look, autonomy is basically applied AI. So in terms of communications, the drone itself, the command and control of that, the autonomy of that, that's all sort of modern technology. And the time frame is, you know, years, like 2-3 years, not 2-3 decades, which is what, you know, traditional weapon systems take, right? Like the F-35 is online, went, I think, full operational capability 2015. The requirements are set in 2001. It took 15 years. I don't know if we have 15 years here. So the application of commercial methodologies is critical.
Right. Well, we've covered a lot of different areas of your book. Let's open it up for questions or comments.
We have a question from Samir Nakdani. Samir, do you want to come on line and ask the question yourself, or should I read it out? I can just read it out. I see that he's muted. So Samir says, with the proof points of drones in warfare, how far are we from having no boots on the grounds, and what will that war look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, the Pentagon has made the decision or policy that autonomous weapons will not make life decisions, right? There will be a human somewhere in that kill chain. I think there will definitely be areas where we can send a robot instead of a human and reduce risk in life. But will they completely negate the need for a manned army and a thinking person? Again, you know, as Claudius says, you know, war is just an extension of politics, or politics by other means. And so those are all still human elements, and so we might have less people, but I don't I think we're very far away from a fully robotic war, and nor should we want that, right? I mean, again, make the decision to take life or to destroy things is a very, very grave one, and you want it to be well reasoned with some humans in the loop.
We have one person who's raised their hand, Paul Davis. Go ahead, Paul.
You're on mute, Paul.
Yes. Hi. Hi, Raj. I'm just curious because a lot of these technologies which are developed are used for domestic purposes, like drone, for example. And DARPA has developed a lot of these technologies which are maybe used in different contexts. So who holds the patent for all this? Like when the defense industry, when Pentagon invests in this, who holds the patent for this technology? Just curious.
Well, I can speak to the small companies because at least Defense Innovation Unit was buying products. So it's if you're buying a product, the product company maintains its IP ownership, right? And look, the government doesn't necessarily build things, right? It doesn't build its own airplanes. So just like in some of those things, it's the company owns it. Now, there's certain areas, especially if the government paid for the R&D, they need to have some ownership or ability to ensure adequate supply if that supplier goes away. But I think it's done on a case-by-case basis.
Mhm.
I think Sanjeev has a question. Sanjeev, you can ask it. Or should I?
Hi, Arun and Raj. Thanks for this fascinating conversation between two leaders in government and in business. Really enjoying this. I have a question regarding INDEX, which, as I'm sure you know, is a cross-border initiative between the US and India to encourage innovation and entrepreneurship in the defense arena. What are your views on its chances of success? How is it doing now? And how do we ensure that this endeavor succeeds?
Maybe I'll take a crack and I'll let Arun. Actually, my last official act when I was in the DIU job was to go with Joe Felser to India to help talk to them about IDEX and their version of DIU. So it's nice to see it actually come to fruition now so many years later. Look, it's the world's largest democracy and the world's oldest democracy, both fearful of a adventurous China, right? The amount of skirmishes happening on the Indian-Chinese border on a daily basis is scary. And the Indian technology ecosystem has created so much new innovation and have a very strong prowess in software. So I think there's a natural convergence, as the Quad will continue to expand. And this is another way of defense and security cooperation. So I think the chances are high. And ideally that our political leaders, continue to emphasize its importance. Arun?
Yeah, I would agree with Raj. In fact, I was at a meeting just last week at Stanford where there was a meeting of the various parties involved in INDEX. So we had DIU folks, IDEX folks. And what was encouraging was the level of collaboration, the open conversation, and a sense of increasing trust in each other. Now, from there to a lot of action in terms of Indian companies being able to sell to US defense and US small companies sell to Indian defense, I think we've got some ways to go, but the direction is definitely a good one. I would love to see it speed up, which would help young companies on both sides.
Thank you both.
Any other?
I think Shobha had a question. Shobha, I'm gonna add you.
Sanjeev asked the India part of the question. I was curious about where India was in the adoption. The other part of the question was, other than the US and China, who else is making significant efforts in this? And this is a unrelated secondary question. Google tells me that military innovations that have entered civil life include EpiPen and duct tape and things like that. So I'm curious about, do you see any possibilities of innovations that are happening in the military space that we can see civilian application for?
Yeah, no, great question. Look, I think this is a global phenomenon. So a lot of great work happening in NATO, right? For the first time a land war on European soil in 80 years. So they're taking it very seriously. You see Japan investing heavily in its own defenses. Again, given the fear of these threats. So I think it's a global thing, and the more that, again, countries that believe in democracy band together, the better they will be. Yeah, in terms of technology from the military, there's been a ton, of course, that have come from NASA and the government, Velcro being another one. I think really the idea behind DIU was, in today's world, right, if you were the best aerospace engineer in the 1950s or 60s, you went to NASA or the government, because that's who's going to space. I mean, these last four individuals that went to space went on a private company, right? So the best aerospace engineers are maybe no longer working there. So I'm more interested in what are these commercial capabilities that we think will move over to that side of the house.
DARPA is a great example of a place from which a lot of what we do today, computers, a lot of aspects of computation, internet came from there.
Mm-hmm.
I see Himanshu.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Hey, Raj, great to meet you. In fact, I'm halfway through your book. Excellent book, I must say, and I recommended it to one of my friend in Northrop Grumman. I hope you don't mind. But yeah, the comments, this is really eye-opening. Just wanted to congratulate you on this book. I know you met my daughter, Muskan, at the USISPF Summit. So yeah, great work, man.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question? Is that all right, Arun?
Yes,
Yeah. So, Raj and Arun, I'd pose this to you both. I knew Qatar quite well at Hoover. He visited periodically, and we greatly admired him. And now I would like to ask you guys, what would Qatar do? How would he suggest approaching the problem of Putin? The problem of dealing with Russia today?
Arun, you want to start?
Well, this is difficult for me to say. I mean, Raj worked much more closely, but has worked closely with Carter, and this is also not really quite a situation that we saw in this way. But during the Obama administration, that's when the Crimea thing occurred, and the administration was trying to find the right balance between try to find the balance to constrain Putin, but not get America deeply involved. So that was the needle that I remember the administration was trying to thread. And it was really an all-in approach of the Obama administration, where every agency of the government was marching in the same direction of trying to constrain Russia, constrain their oligarchs, constrain their bad actors. And that was and essentially communicate how such actions were not going to be supported or approved or condoned by the US and its allies. And the way I see it is, I mean, Secretary Carter was very much part of that. He was leading defense. So I saw it from the Commerce Department. I had the opportunity to be in many SCIF discussions, looking at what was happening on a daily basis. And we were all very much aligned in the philosophy of how to contain Putin.
Well, if I could just pursue that, my impression of him was he would have definitely been for that, but at the same time, he might have had more of a tendency to engage than I've seen from the last few administrations. There seems to be sort of India is not like this, incidentally. India tends to always have a dimension of engagement in its foreign policy bundle. Whereas I think in dealing with Russia, we seem to have a sense of alienation that almost excludes diplomacy from its kit. What do you think, Raj?
Well, before he answers, let me just introduce Abe. For those who don't know Abe, Abe is has been a distinguished diplomat, professor. He originally he traces roots to India, to the Indian Jewish community, and he was you were in the State Department in which years, Abe? I don't remember now.
85 to 90 with Reagan and Bush. Right. Yeah.
Okay, and Raj.
Well, I think, look, Putin is he's a thug, and so thugs understand strength, and so I think it's not for me to speak with Carter, but I feel like Carter has also shown strength in other ways, and yeah, I mean, I think it's been sort of a bipartisan lack of strength showing against Putin's adventurism and things that he has caused, and I don't think he's somebody that can be negotiated with, until he is backed into a corner, and will encourage others. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a really big decision for the next president as to what to do here. And I think NATO and Europe, or at least the European countries, are going to have to figure out how they contain this, right? Who is to say he's going to stop? His like Xi, of viewing the glory days of bringing the USSR back. It's something we have to take seriously.
Abe, what do you think?
Well, we faced a similar situation in 1985, and in fact, 1982, when President Reagan took over. And I think we were very lucky that Gorbachev and Shevardnadze came along. We can't attribute everything to the Reagan, Bush, Schultz, but there was always a sense, it seemed to me at that time, that engagement should be part of the situation. We called the Soviet Union an evil empire, and everybody around Reagan was very happy with that. I mean, it was a lot of chaos in the New York Times, and they get all upset about how we're going to cause World War III. But the fact is that we did regard them as an evil empire. But I must have been over there, I mean, at least 10 times in the 2 or 3 years in a period, doing a number of things that improved the relationship in, marginal but important ways. And there were several other people like that engaged in that work. And, there were a lot of hard-headed people in the administration who opposed even that. They were very much in favor of, hands off, the kind of policy we have now. And I tend to, Arun, I tend to feel that you should always be engaging in the areas where you want to engage. I remember when they shot down the Korean airliner, it was a real crisis, and a decision was made very quickly to have Schultz go to the Congress and testify and say that we were going to continue to engage with the Soviet Union, despite a monstrously evil act. So I admire the resistance. I admire the standing up to them, to the Russians and the Chinese, for that matter. But I feel sort of as though there's a sense that we've done enough if we've treated them like the thugs they are. I agree with Raj completely on who they are. And I don't think that's true. I don't think it's enough to do that. I would share the Indian view, if I might, that you have to engage with your enemy.
Yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? So which I agree, right? You have to understand, you have to give them an out, right? If you don't, particularly if you think about authoritarian, this is, I think, for both Xi and Putin, so much of their own power base is surrounded on the respect of a small group of elites. And so you have to give them a way out to save face and do the right thing. So yeah, I don't think they're exclusive at all.
If I would say in the case of China, last year on the sidelines of APEC, I think there was a strong effort by the US administration to engage with Xi and his team. And in fact, I think every major secretary in the Biden cabinet went out to China, some more than once. So in the case of China, I do believe there's been a fairly active strategy of engagement.
I agree with you.
Well, thank you.
Excuse me, Raj. This is MR. I just want to, for some of the viewers, talk about if you're a startup in Silicon Valley, how do you go about engaging and navigating the rules, regulations, getting into the DoD deals and such? Can you kind of spend a couple of minutes talking
Sure.
about that?
Yeah, look, I think the landscape's changed tremendously. I mean, there's never been as good of a time for a young company to at least get the early sort of prototype contracts with the DoD. I think there's several front door type of organizations. There's DIU, of course. There's this thing called AFWorks. There's NavalX. Special Forces has one. So I think there's a lot of organizations to interact with. There's a whole cottage industry of consultants and advisors in DC that can help companies navigate. Large companies are looking to partner. So I think there's a lot of ways to do that, and venture investors are getting smart about those ways too, and are providing better advice.
I think we're kind of coming to the end of our conversation. There have been a couple of other comments. We have comments from Sanjeev Joshipura, who says the American public is tiring of military engagements abroad, and there are questions to be asked about whether we can afford them. This relates to Putin. We have Himanshu said asking about the use of Chinese EVs and commercial drones. Are they capturing data from all over the world and sending that back to China? And Raj, how do you think of that as a threat? And you refer to that in your book in terms of drones. So maybe quick comments on those, and then we quickly close.
Sure. So to get your question about the data technology, I don't have up-to-date understanding of what data goes back, but I think it's to the broader TikTok conversation that the country's going under of what data is super important that we want to keep custody of here and not have elsewhere that could be used for other harm. So I think that's a really important question, particularly because here in the US, we have some pretty strict rules between what our military and intelligence organizations can do and what private sector does. So for example, the US does not have its intelligence agencies spy on foreign companies and then give that data to a US company for economic advantage. That's not true in the rest of the world. And so I think similarly, when we think about personal data, we have to be worried about that.
Right. And finally, we have a comment from Ravi Vishwanathan, who says that Europeans are taking Putin seriously and are rearming fast. Poland has the largest land forces in Europe. And also notes like you did, Raj, that major European powers now have defense innovation ventures. So I think that brings us to the close. I want to just close by saying, Raj, thank you for writing this book and for your time today. And the book, as I will discuss, is a fast and engaging read, traversing Silicon Valley and the Pentagon, taking us to places as diverse as the skies over Iraq. Great story of Raj flying over Iraq, war zones in Ukraine, and conversations in Stanford University. So thank you for a wonderful book, Raj. Thanks.
Thank you all. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, Arun, for a fabulously conducted conversation. Hardly surprising we know you as a seasoned interlocutor. Raj, thank you for being here also. Really enjoyed learning more about your book. As a layperson listening to two areas of interest, I was appreciative of the fact that you made it accessible to all of us. It was a little bit like having the curtain pulled back and seeing the behind the scenes activity. Thanks for that. And as you said, if people are protesting, we must be having interesting conversations if they're willing to show up and protest. So that's also a sign of something. I walk away with this awareness that individuals matter. Every one of the stories that you told was a reaffirmation of Arun's point that the book will make an interesting read. My only moment of sadness was when you said Iron Man is not imminent. I had hopes of that being one of the things that you would offer, but thank you very much for a great conversation and look forward to reading the book soon. Thanks from all of us at Indiaspora. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.